are beginning the virtual Holy Rosary today a little late. On behalf of Ace Choir, we welcome you all to participate in the devotion of the Holy Rosary. We also invite you to accompany us on this journey during May month. May this devotion lead us to build a relation with Christ through Mother Mary. Before we begin, it's a kind request to everyone participating to put your phones in silent mode. Thank you. In Fatima, Our Lady appeared 6 times to the shepherd children Lucia, Jacinta and Francisco. In each and every apparition, Our Lady insisted upon the praying of the Most Holy Rosary. Saint John Paul II, in his document on the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Rosary, pleaded that the whole world pray the Holy Rosary for the salvation of the family and for world peace. The famous Rosary priest, Father Patrick Peyton, put it concisely: the family that prays together stays together. And a world at prayer is a world at peace. Why not obey the new saint, Saint John Paul II? Why not obey the Mother of God, Our Lady of Fatima's requests? If done, the family will be saved and there will be peace that the human heart so longs for. Let us make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Mary, her Immaculate Conception. How would we have acted if we could have chosen our own mother? I am sure we would have chosen the one we have, adorning her with every possible grace. That is what Christ did. Christ, being all-powerful, all-wise, love itself, His power carried out His will. This is the clearest reason why our Lord granted His mother, from the very moment of her Immaculate Conception, all possible privileges. She was free from the power of Satan. She is beautiful, spotless, and pure in soul and body. Let us sing the hymn, Oh How We Love.
Oh, how we love Mary, to praise you, honor your name, bless you always. You are the mother of Jesus Christ and mother of humankind. You're the glory of a race, new every morning is your love. Virgin most blessed, you're the song in our hearts, and we will praise you through all eternity. O Mother blessed, for us obtained to love as you love, care as you care. Help us say yes when we are called to serve and do God's will. You're the glory of a race, new every morning is your love. Virgin most blessed, you're the song in our hearts, and we will praise you through all eternity.
Apostles' Creed. I believe in God,
The Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth,
and in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord,
was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
for increase in faith, hope, charity, and love. Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As today is Tuesday, we will meditate on the sorrowful mystery. The first sorrowful mystery, the agony in the garden. In this mystery, we ask your intercession, O Mama, for all the faithful, that we may learn from the life of Jesus and saints to accept and undergo pain in our journey towards heaven. Hence, may we transform our lives into a new being in Christ, especially during this lockdown due to the pandemic, when we are getting ample of time to reflect and pray. Mama Mary, pray for us. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy.
beautiful Lady, help us to be pure from within. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Second sorrowful mystery, the scourging at the pillar. In this mystery, we will be praying for all those people, those who are having fear. Yes, Mama. There is lots of fear within us. Being human, there is insecurity. There is fear of losing. There is fear of giving up our life. Mama, these are certain fear I'm speaking about, but there are lots of fear, and particularly this fear can be conquered by true love. Mama, please help us to understand this love. And as this scourging at the pillar, you were there. You saw your only son, begotten son there. He was being tortured like anything. And that was also your fear. But in our life, I don't think so that we will be having so much of fear. But it was your love which conquered each and everything. Mama, please intercede with all the angels and saints that we may understand love and we may conquer fear, each and every kind of fear which is prevailing in us. For this we'll pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in the need of thy mercy.
beautiful Lady, help us to be pure from within. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Third sorrowful mystery, the crowning with thorns. Lord Jesus, in this decade, we remember all those people who are suffering from any kind of mental illness or instability or depression. We also pray for such people who are not able to think in the right way, for those people who, even though they can see in front of them what is right and what is wrong, but they are unable to discern the right things. Those people who are not able to accept the right things and the truth and are unable to unlearn whatever is wrong in their knowledge, in their learning, which they have received from the surrounding. Lord, as in this decade, you received those thorns into your head which pricked you. By the grace of your receiving those pain into your mind, Lord, with the healing, with that pain, with the grace of that pain, we ask healing for all these people. Mama Mary, please intercede for your children. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in most need of thy mercy.
Amen.
beautiful Lady, help us to be pure
pray for us.
Fourth sorrowful mystery, the carrying of the cross. Mama, for your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, there are a lot of people in this world who are leaving the cares of this world and carrying the cross so that they can be holy. Mama, please intercede for all those people who are carrying that ignominious cross, and with that supernatural seal they might do all their lives. For this, please do intercede for us. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy.
Amen. Beautiful Lady, help us to be pure from within. Mary, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Fifth sorrowful mystery, the crucifixion. Lord, we pray for all the deceased souls from our family tree, and also we remember the people who lost their life due to COVID-19 virus, that their soul may rest in peace. Mama Mary, do intercede for this intention. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most need of thy mercy.
Amen.
beautiful Lady, help us to be pure from within. Mary, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Hail, Holy Queen.
Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping, in this valley of tears. Turn them, most gracious Advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
Let's all kneel down for the litany. Litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ hear us.
Christ graciously hear us.
God the Father of heaven.
Have mercy on us.
God the Son, Redeemer of the world.
Have mercy on us.
God the Holy Spirit.
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity, one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be, pray for us. Holy Mary,
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God,
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ,
Pray for us.
Mother of Divine Grace,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate,
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled,
Pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
Seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of Ivory,
Pray for us.
House of Gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of the Covenant,
Pray for us.
Gate of Heaven,
Pray for us.
Morning Star,
Pray for us.
Health of the Sick,
Pray for us.
Refuge of Sinners,
Pray for us.
Comforter of the Afflicted,
Pray for us.
Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
Queen of Angels,
Pray for us.
Queen of Patriarchs,
Pray for us.
Queen of Prophets,
Pray for us.
Queen of Apostles,
Pray for us.
Queen of Martyrs,
Pray for us.
Queen of Confessors,
Pray for us.
Queen of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
Queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
Queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
Queen of the Most Holy Rosary,
Pray for us.
Queen of Peace,
Pray for us.
Queen of Family,
Pray for us.
spare us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Spare us, O Lord.
graciously hear us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Have mercy on us,
pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray.
Grant, we beseech thee, O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, be delivered from the present sorrow and enjoy eternal happiness. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
We'll say the Memorare, offering our each and every unsaid intention, asking the intercession of our dear Mother. The Memorare.
Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen.
We'll say the special prayer by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic COVID-19. Together, we fly to your protection, O Holy Mother of God, in the present tragic situation when the whole world is prey to suffering and anxiety. We fly to you, Mother of God and our Mother, and seek refuge under your protection. Virgin Mary, turn your merciful eyes towards us amid this coronavirus pandemic. Comfort those who are distraught and mourn their loved ones who have died and at times are buried in a way that grieves them deeply. Be close to those who are considered for their loved ones who are sick and who, in order to prevent the spread of the disease, cannot be close to them. Fill with hope those who are troubled by the uncertainty of the future and the consequences for the economy and employment. Mother of God and our Mother, pray for us to God, the Father of mercies, that this great suffering may end and that hope and peace may dawn anew. Plead with your divine Son, as you did at Cana, so that the families of the sick and the victims be comforted, and their hearts be opened to confidence and trust. Protect those doctors, nurses, health workers, and volunteers who are on the front line of this emergency and are risking their lives to save others. Support their heroic effort and grant them strength, generosity, and continued health. Be close to those who assist the sick night and day, and to priests who in their pastoral concern and fidelity to the gospel are trying to help and support everyone. Blessed Virgin, illumine the minds of men and women engaged in scientific research, that they may find effective solutions to overcome this virus. Support national leaders that with wisdom, solicitude, and generosity they may come to the aid of those lacking the basic necessities of life, and may devise social and economic solutions inspired by far-sightedness and solidarity. Mary Most Holy, stir our consciences so that the enormous funds invested in developing and stockpiling arms will instead be spent on promoting effective research on how to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Beloved Mother, help us realize that we are all members of one great family and to recognize the bond that unites us so that in a spirit of fraternity and solidarity we can help to alleviate countless situations of poverty and need. Make us strong in faith, persevering in service, constant in prayer. Mary, consolation of the afflicted, embrace all your children in distress and pray that God will stretch out His all-powerful hand and free us from this terrible pandemic so that life can serenely resume its normal course. To you who shine on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope, do we entrust ourselves, O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen. We'll sing a hymn as I kneel.
As I kneel before you, as I bow my head in prayer, take this day, make it yours and fill me with your love. Ave Maria, Gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu. All I have I give you, every dream and wish I yours, Mother of mine, present them to my Lord. Ave Maria, Gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu, benedicta tu.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint John Paul II,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint Jose Maria Escriva.
Pray for us.
Let's make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, friends, for joining us in this devotion of the Holy Rosary. To invite your friends and family members to join us in this journey throughout the month of May as we meditate on the Holy Rosary every day at 5 p.m. Now we'll prepare ourselves for the virtual Holy Mass. Kindly join us in the hymns that we are about to sing right now, while we are also preparing our altar for the Holy Mass.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. ACE Choir welcomes you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Thomas. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for entrance hymn.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all.
And with your spirit.
Let us begin this Mass asking the Lord for pardon and forgiveness for our sins, so that we may worthily celebrate these holy mysteries. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Therefore I ask Blessed Mary, the Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Let us pray. Grant, we pray, Almighty God, that celebrating the mysteries of the Lord's resurrection, we may merit to receive the joy of our redemption through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
In today's first reading, we will get to know that a great number of people became believers and turned to the Lord.
First reading, Acts of Apostles, chapter 11, verses 19 to 26. Now those who were scattered because of the persecution that took place over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch. And they spoke the word to no one except Jews. But among them were some men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who on coming to Antioch spoke to the Hellenists also, proclaiming the Lord Jesus. The hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number became believers and turned to the Lord. News of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. When he came and saw the grace of God, he rejoiced, and he exhorted them all to remain faithful to the Lord with steadfast devotion. For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith. And a great many people were brought to the Lord. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. So it was that for an entire year they met with the church and taught a great many people. And it was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
All you nations, praise the Lord. All you nations, praise the Lord. On the holy mount stands a city the Lord founded. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of you, O city of God. All you nations, praise the Lord. Among those who know me, I mention Rahab and Babylon, Philistia too, and Tyre with Ethiopia. This one was born here, they say, and of Zion it shall be said, this one and that one, they were born in it, for the Most High himself will establish it. All you nations, praise the Lord. The Lord records as he registers the peoples. This one was born there. Singers and dancers alike, they say, all my springs are in you. All you nations, praise the Lord.
Let's all rise for acclamation.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. My sheep listen to me, says the Lord. I know them and they follow me. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
In today's Gospel reading, we will hear that Jews do not accept Jesus as the Messiah.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you.
O Lord.
At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe, because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We are well into this Paschal season. We are still rejoicing at the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it is only in that context that the word that we hear, the gospel that we hear, makes sense to us. Of course, this situation takes place in Jerusalem before the Lord's Passion, and the Jewish people are still wondering, who is this man? Who is this Jesus? And we know well who he is. We know now that he is risen from the dead. All the doubts are gone from our minds, from our hearts. But it is good to be reminded of what was going on. And I'm saying right now everything starts making sense to us. It says that it was winter when Jesus came to the temple. Maybe it's just a description of the time of the year, but maybe it also describes what was going on in the hearts of the people around, of the Jewish people, that they were so cold. Their heart was really closed to what the Lord wanted to tell them, and they were asking him, "Why are you keeping us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." We know that Christ is risen, that he is the Messiah, that he is the fulfillment of all those prophecies, of everything that was spoken to him, about him. And now we know that he has risen from the dead, that he is alive, so that he could gather everyone to himself. He has been presented to us, we heard it last Sunday, as the shepherd, as the one who leads the flock, who goes ahead of the flock. And he says, "My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me." It is not a knowledge that is, on our rational level, but it's a different type of knowledge. Whenever the Bible speaks about knowledge, it is something very different. It is about love. God knows us because he loves us. And we know God because we know that we are loved. And that is very different. We can learn many things, we can, understand things, but it is that type of knowledge, knowing that there is someone who's loved us so much that he gave his life for us. And therefore we are called to follow, we are called to listen, we are called to be convinced today that there is no one else and there is no other place that we can be saved. And there is a gift that comes with it. What is the gift? Eternal life. If we separate ourselves from God, if we do not follow his voice, if we try to find our own ways, our own paths, we know that we lose that life. That life escapes us. Because God is love, and we separate ourselves from him, we don't know who we are. We are lost. But this voice constantly comes to us every time we celebrate the Eucharist, every time we gather. It's a confirmation, it's like a guarantee that God gives us that he loves us, that he knows us profoundly, that he even knows that sometimes our hearts may grow cold, that we may go astray, but he loves us. And he says that no one will snatch us out of his Father's hand. And it's true what St. Paul later on will say. He says, we know that no sin, no, it's not death, nothing can separate us from the love of God that was manifested to us in Jesus Christ. And he says, the Father and I are one. Christ has come to reveal the face of God to us. Who is God? It is enough to look at the crucified Christ, at the risen Christ, to know who God is. And this gave power to the disciples, to the apostles, to go. Yes, they were persecuted, which was probably necessary at that time. This persecution just scattered them all over the place, but it gave them also a chance to proclaim, to be witnesses to this love of God. So they go all over the place, and they end up also in Antioch. And it says that what they did, they proclaimed the word to the people. What is this word? Is this Logos? Is Jesus Christ, this word made flesh. The only word that we really need to hear in our lives. Because if this word is not heard, as I was saying, we are all lost. We are all confused in our lives. And so they go, they proclaim. And people, by listening, they convert. Their life changes. Everything is new. They are no more scattered, but they become gathered to this shepherd that leads them. And we heard that it was for the first time in Antioch that these disciples, this group of people, those followers of Jesus, were called Christians. And this is what we are called to be today. Not just by name, but to live this reality in the places where we are, in our families, around us, wherever we go, that with us may go that message, that word, that Jesus Christ is risen, that He is alive, that He calls us to follow Him, and that He is the only one that gives meaning to our life, and that He gives us, in fact, eternal life. And this is what we are going to celebrate now in this Eucharist, knowing that this sacrifice and this banquet that we are partaking of is really our strength, and that makes us focused on what is ahead of us, knowing that we follow the Good Shepherd into the eternal life. Amen. Now let us present our prayers and intentions to our Father. We pray for the Holy Church. We pray for the Pope, for all those who are called Christians, that the Church may bear witness to the risen Lord. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Let us pray for the world that we live in, for this world that is going through tribulations, trials, especially around this time. We pray that for all those who are having power and authority, who enact laws, that they may always do it in the spirit of service. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Let us also pray for all those who suffer in their minds, in their bodies, those who are lonely, rejected, vulnerable in this society. We pray that they may always be encouraged, knowing that there is this shepherd that takes care of his sheep and that loves them. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
And let us also pray for our community, wherever this Mass might reach us, for all those who have asked to pray for their intentions, for the intentions of this Mass. We pray that the Lord may hear and fulfill our prayers. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God our Father, we entrust our prayers to you with confidence, knowing that you hear us, because you are our Father who loves us. And we present them to you through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Lord, accept this bread and wine. Take our hearts and make them
brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands for the praise and glory of his name, for our good and good of His holy church.
Grant, we pray, O Lord, that we may always find delight in these Paschal mysteries, so that the renewal constantly at work within us may be the cause of our unending joy. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them up to the
Let
Lord.
us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation at all times to acclaim you, O Lord, but in this time above all to laud you yet more gloriously when Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed. He never ceases to offer himself for us, but defends us and ever pleads our cause before you. He is the sacrificial victim who dies no more, the Lamb once slain who lives forever. Therefore, overcome with paschal joy, every land, every people exalts in your praise, and even the heavenly powers with the angelic hosts sing together the unending hymn of your glory as they acclaim. You are indeed holy, O Lord, and all you have created rightly gives you praise. For through your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, by the power and working of the Holy Spirit, you give life to all things and make them holy. And you never cease to gather a people to yourself, so that from the rising of the sun to its setting, a pure sacrifice may be offered to your name. Therefore, O Lord, we humbly implore you, by the same Spirit graciously make holy these gifts we have brought to you for consecration, that they may become the body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at whose command we celebrate these mysteries. For on the night he was betrayed, he himself took bread, and giving you thanks, he said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it. For this is my body, which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and giving you thanks, he said the blessing, and gave the chalice to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, O Lord, as we celebrate the memorial of the saving passion of your Son, his wondrous resurrection and ascension into heaven, and as we look forward to his second coming, we offer you in thanksgiving this holy and living sacrifice. Look, we pray upon the oblation of your church, and recognizing the sacrificial victim by whose death you willed to reconcile us to yourself, grant that we who are nourished by the body and blood of your Son and filled with his Holy Spirit may become one body, one spirit in Christ. May he make of us an eternal offering to you, so that we may obtain an inheritance with your elect, especially with the most blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with blessed Joseph, her spouse, with your blessed apostles and glorious martyrs, and with all the saints, on whose constant intercession in your presence we rely for unfailing help. May this sacrifice of our reconciliation, we pray, O Lord, advance the peace and salvation of all the world. Be pleased to confirm in faith and charity your pilgrim church on earth, with your servant Francis our Pope, and Thomas our Bishop, the order of bishops, all the clergy, and the entire people you have gained for your own. Listen graciously to the prayers of this family whom you have summoned before you. In your compassion, O merciful Father, gather to yourself all your children scattered throughout the world. To our departed brothers and sisters, and to all who are pleasing to you at their passing from this life, give kind admittance to your kingdom. There we hope to enjoy forever the fullness of your glory, through Christ our Lord, through whom you bestow on the world all that is good. Through him and with him and in him, O God Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
At the Saviour's command, and formed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you," look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
Let us offer each other the sign of peace.
Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world,
grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb.
Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof,
but only say the word and my soul shall be healed.
Since we cannot receive the Holy Communion, let us remember our first Holy Communion and best moment when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart. Since now I cannot receive him sacramentally, be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen. I'm rejoicing night and day as I walk the narrow way. For the hand of God in all my life I see, and the reason of my day Let us say the prayer after communion of St. Thomas Aquinas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having been pleased, through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me a sinner and your unworthy servant with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss. When you will call me, I pray that you bring me a sinner to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say a prayer for priest of Saint Therese of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Hear, O Lord, our prayers, that this most holy exchange by which you have redeemed us may bring your help in this present life and ensure for us eternal gladness. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Let us go in peace.
Thanks be to God. Mother of Jesus and Mother of holiness, bearing the light of the world, radiant with glory, the glory of Jesus, conceived by the Spirit of God. In the beginning At the beginning, God, everything started with the word, with a word. Mama Mary, do intercede for all of us that daily, Mama Mary, we use a word, and help us that intercede for us that we may not take that word leniently and say anything to anybody. Help us that every time, whatever we speak, the words that are coming out from our mind, mouth, it can heal the other person. Do pray for us, Mama Mary, that through our words we can heal others. For this we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother, to thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Hallelujah. Rejoice, for he who married though despair. Hallelujah. He is risen as he foretold. Hallelujah. Pray for us to the Father. Hallelujah. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Hallelujah. For the Lord has truly risen. Hallelujah. Let us pray. O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Saint John Paul II, pray for us. Saint Mother Teresa, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Escriva, pray for us. Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed evening ahead. Stay safe and take precautions. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the evening, we are going to do Rosary. Do join us.